The book I'm going to talk to you about today is this one, The Secret Barrister. This is a departure for me because it's a factual book rather than a story or a novel or one from the imagination. I'm not a great lover of factual books. I think because my day job as a sort of journalist in PR means I'm dealing with stories and factual stuff all the time. So to listen to a novel or a story that's made up is an escape for me. So I tend to stay away from factual books. But I fancied this one, The Secret Barrister, which came out in 2018 for a number of reasons, which I'll share with you. One of the reasons is that in the 1990s, I was a crime reporter here in my hometown of Swindon in Wiltshire. And as a crime reporter, that meant I was visiting the police and the courts every single day. It was interesting, it was busy, I enjoyed the law, and I knew the media law around courts very, very well. Better actually than most solicitors and barristers who entered those courts at that time, not now, I hasten to add. So I thought I would read it basically as a book about the criminal justice system that we have in this country and the multiple ways in which it's failing to actually give us justice. And there's so many things in this book that I really recognise, even back then in the 1990s. So The Secret Barrister doesn't put this all at the door of one particular government. It's governments over time. The overall thing that you're going to get from this book is that you need to really recognise a criminal justice system that works costs money. And you can't keep taking money away from it, otherwise it will cease to work. And also, one of the things he addresses is the amount of people we're putting into prison. And everybody gets a bit of blame here throughout this book at different times. Some of it justified, some not in my view. But anyway, one of the things I really recognise is legal aid. Okay, so in the past, when I was a crime reporter, if you were taken to court and you had very low income, you could apply for legal aid so that you could get fair representation. That has largely been taken away now, except in a very few circumstances. That happened many years ago, and as a result of that, many legal firms pulled out from doing any criminal work because they couldn't get legal aid money, and they concentrated on more lucrative forms of law like commercial law, business law, probates, wills, stuff that people always knew they were going to have to pay for. But criminal law, they moved away from that because legal aid was being pushed and pushed, costs were going down and down. They couldn't make enough money. They couldn't make a profitable business out of it. So now there is a huge injustice going on quietly under the radar because of a lack of legal aid. And that could mean you're an innocent person who is accused of a crime. You go to court, and if your income, I believe it's over £37,500 household income, you are going to have to pay for your own legal representation. And believe me, those costs rack up damn quickly. And even if you're found at the end of it innocent, you've still got that massive bill to face. And that's just one of the things that's explored in this. Also with barristers, I met many barristers when I was a crime reporter, and I've met several since, and some were absolutely lovely, some definitely not. The ones I found not so lovely could be extremely arrogant and rude. I remember once being asked to leave a family court because the barrister, who was female, said that I wasn't allowed to be there. Unfortunately for her, I knew exactly that I was allowed to be there. I knew under which act and subsection of the act I was allowed to be there, and I was able to quote that verbatim as she lifted this weighty tome, flicked through it to find the relevant act to tell me why I shouldn't be there in front of the judge. She was rather embarrassed when it was found out I was right. I was allowed to be there, and the judge allowed me to stay, and I did report upon that story, but just so you know, in family court, you can only report certain things because children and relationships are protected by law. But as a qualified journalist, I knew that, and I knew how to report it properly. But anyway, The Secret Barrister is interesting. It talks about all aspects of where the criminal justice system isn't working. Largely, it puts the blame at the government that is trying to cut corners all the time over successive governments and cut bills here and there, and not considering how law needs to happen. and that people need representation, that they don't understand the law because our law is incredibly complex. There's not only statute and what's been written down, there's common law, which has been built up piecemeal over centuries. So there's a lot of history of the law in this book. And I find it very interesting and very, very good read. The writer, the Secret Barrister, is not all that complimentary of the police. There is a lot of descriptions of the police not filling out correct paperwork, it not being available when barristers come along to take cases over, that there being a big disconnect between someone being arrested and charged and then the CPS doing their paperwork, the police doing their paperwork, so the paperwork's in order for when a barrister takes up a case, if that becomes relevant, or a solicitor takes up the case. And there's so much time wasting that goes on and so much inefficiency, and even where they try to bring in efficiencies, it doesn't really work. Mainly, I think, if you read between the lines, because people look to always do things cheap instead of looking to do things that have value and that will save money in the long run. Everything is like short-term cost cutting. This even comes down to journalists who don't come off well in this book. There's a lot of talks about tabloid headlines and just picking out of cases what you want to pick out. Well, actually, the media have always been part of the legal system. Otherwise, as a crime reporter, why is there a press bench in every single court in the land? Why are journalists allowed to ask certain questions which members of the public wouldn't be allowed to? Why are journalists trained in law? And it's because part of the legal process is possible exposure to the public. Now, in a court case, thousands and thousands of words will be exchanged by all the different parties, and a journalist will have to summarise that. They can't write a book about every day's court proceedings, so inevitably they are going to make some subjective judgments about what bits they're going to put in their story, but even that is subject to media law. You do have to be fair and balanced. The problem with the media comes, and it's one of money, is that there aren't crime reporters and court reporters anymore who sit in court all day. Even if there are, they tend to be freelance. They'll be selling to multiple different outlets. And they don't sit in court, on really long hearings that last for months and months and months. And a story goes out every day. It's just not like that anymore. They might come on day 1, day 5, and then the final day. And so that fairness in court reporting that used to exist but back in the 1990s, when I was allowed to go to court and cover a 5-day trial, or go even to Crown Court in Bristol or Winchester and occasionally into London to cover a trial however long it took, those days are gone, largely because of money and because people don't value the power of reporting what's going on, just like they don't value the criminal justice system. And so things get distorted and summarised. So there were loads of things in this book that I really recognise, both as a journalist and as someone who's worked around the legal system for a couple of years, right back in the 1990s, and occasionally deal with it now, though more in sort of civil court proceedings. So it is worth reading, but there is one huge problem with this. When you write a book that calls for change and you want to be a campaigning voice, you need to stand up and have the courage of your convictions, and that's a really hard thing to do. I mean, I can think of several people I've dealt with in my career who've stuck their neck on the line to reveal something, to say something that they believe to be true and to be in the public interest, and they've nearly lost everything for doing so. I mean, you can think of whistleblowers that have done this, people who've lost their jobs as a result, people might have lost subsequently their income or their family relationships, or maybe even had to move to another country to find a job in order to stick their neck on the line. Now, obviously, this person who's written this hasn't gone that far, so they like to complain about the legal system, but they don't like to stick their heads above the parapet because they're the secret barrister, so we don't know who that actually is. The only thing we know is I'm a barrister. I work in the criminal justice system, and every day I see how fairness is not guaranteed. Too often, the system fails those it is meant to protect. The innocent are wronged and the guilty are allowed to walk free. Okay, that's great, Secret Barrister, but if you want things to change, you have to be part of the change and not be a person who hides behind things, who writes a book telling other people to do things differently if you're not prepared to do it yourself. And for me, this is the conundrum at the heart of this book. It's okay being secret, but don't expect things to change if you haven't got the courage of your own convictions and you haven't got the courage to stand up and say who you are.
That's it for this week. Please subscribe and hit the little bell for notifications.